Me? I'm the expert?
Yeah, I thought maybe you know someone.
Yeah. I know these guys over here. I got Hugh Jackman. He's an expert.
He's an expert conversation designer.
Expert at everything, really. Singer, actor, producer, probably. Who knows?
Yeah. No, good to see you, Jason. Like, wait, did I already do my deja vu joke?
I don't remember.
I don't know, but no, good to see you. You're very busy these days. That's why you can't join for the entire day, and it's of course a little different. But we can't do this without you, right?
Oh,
and
thank
you know,
you.
it's been going okay, but you know, it's just different. It's very different. So what is keeping you busy in the field of robotics, and maybe also, you know, now with everything that's happening at large language models, how do you see that in the field of robotics? Is there anything you could share about that?
Oh, absolutely, Hans. That's a great question. First of all, I'm Jason Gilbert, for those of you who don't know me. And I work at Intuition Robotics with a robot named LEQ. And LEQ is a little table-sized robot that is meant for older adults in the US. It helps keep them company, helps keep them sharp cognitively and you know, with games, but also engages them. And sort of a lot of these people are people that, you know, don't have a lot of interaction with other people. They're alone. So having a robot as a companion really helps them get through the day. So that's an amazing thing. And I love doing that, creating great conversational AI for good, you know, Hans, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But the large language models is an interesting question. How do we incorporate large language models into something that is meant for kind of an audience that's a bit vulnerable, right? I mean, you don't want to set GPT loose on adults who are maybe a little bit scared of technology, and you know, they have so it's really a balancing act here on what we do and how, you know. So I'm going to tell you what we're doing with the large language models here at Intuition, and maybe that can give people some ideas or inspiration or just whatever. So one of the first things that we're doing is we're letting our older adults, our customers, paint using DALL-E 2. So we connected DALL-E 2 obviously is the large, the thing that turns texts into amazing images. We've all played around with it. We've all made crazy images of ourselves and stuff. So we're kind of a bit cynical about it, our generation, right? I mean, we're playing around with it. We have so many different options, but for older adults, they haven't really played around with it. So for them, you give them the option of, hey, let's paint using, you know, artificial intelligence. And then you tell them, okay, what do you want to paint? Just tell me. And they say what they want to paint. And all of a sudden it creates this image for them.
That's really
it's mind blowing. Cool. It really is for them. It's really an incredible experience. So, you know, a lot of our customers have arthritis and can't paint. They can't, some of them who enjoyed painting can't do it anymore. So this is a great way. So that's one way to use large language models, but there's a lot of different stuff that we can do with it. And we're starting to sort of experiment. One of the other things that we're experimenting with is the ability to talk to characters, which is something that I think is an amazing, you know, so for instance, there's all these apps that you can now through API connect and talk to Albert Einstein or talk to your favorite Elon Musk. Or Spider-Man, or, you know, just anyone, really. You can talk to anyone.
It's an interesting list.
Exactly. And then it goes to like a medieval peasant. So there's this weird, it goes Einstein, Elon Musk, a medieval peasant. It's like, why would I want to talk to a medieval peasant? But I guess there are people out there that are just like, oh man, if I could only talk to a medieval peasant, my life would be complete.
Yeah, finally. Feel so at home. Yeah, because I can imagine, like what you said is interesting, that you could add a lot of scope, a lot of chit chat if it's you know, to keep people company, a robot. So they might want to be able to talk about everything. So it's really great that you can have an answer for everything, but at the same time, you're dealing with a vulnerable audience. So you want to manage it very properly. That is a very interesting balancing act, because you could say like the scope, in a way, the potential scope is unlimited. So you could solve for that by the click of a button almost now.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's dangers with that. I think there's pros and cons to that. And I think that we are using large language models and we want to embrace them. But there's also a big risk. They're not there quite yet. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do, guardrails and limitations on large language models and prompt engineering to make it in line with the rest of the content. Because, for instance, her LEQ's database has thousands and thousands of responses that were written over the years. There's a voice to the character that I helped craft, and then all of a sudden, if it jumps, and then, like as a fallback, for instance, if it jumps to GPT, and it's answering in a different voice.
Yeah,
it's slightly different. So like there's a sense of, wait a second, who am I talking to? And that's, you can compound that because it's an older audience, right? So they have cognitive issues anyway, that they're like, oh my God, I'm talking to a robot in my house, and all of a sudden it's a different voice, and it can be very confusing. And that's the last thing that we want to do. We want to give them a sense of confidence. We want to empower them. We don't want to create a sense where they're questioning their own reality. I don't think that's a good business model. But so that's why I was saying the approach is, on one hand, okay, we're going to handle fallbacks, maybe use the large language models. And I hear a lot of the people that are talking at your wonderful, wonderful festival, like Braden at VoiceFlow, talks about it. And if you go on his LinkedIn, you can see some amazing posts where he talks about how to use these things as a fallback. And I think that right now, if you want to use large language models, that's the place to do it. Of course, you have to do some work in terms of getting it to sound more or less like the rest of your content. But that's a great place to start if you want to just incorporate large language models. And I think that's what we're going to be doing eventually. But again, we have to be very, very careful.
Yeah. And so you kind of implicitly start talking about trust, about persona, right? How do you trust the experience? And persona is consistency and tone of voice creates that trust. As a personality expert, and you've won prizes for some of the chatbots that you've created over the years, Miss Piggy. What's something that you feel a lot of brands maybe get wrong when they think about persona? And maybe as a follow-up on that, like what's, if you're an expert and you know what you want to do in terms of persona, how do you communicate that to stakeholders that might not be as educated yet on the importance of it?
It's a great question, man. It really is a great question.
It's what I do.
You ask great questions, and I have to answer these questions because they're really tough.
Your job's harder here. Yeah.
Listen, like, how do you convince? Let's start with the end. How do you convince stakeholders that you need to incorporate a personality or some kind of persona? Because there's a difference between personality content, you talk about this, and then a persona, like what's driving the chatbot or the agent or the. And it comes down to, when you're trying to convince stakeholders, it's telling them, and you talk about this a lot yourself in the courses that you have, amazing courses, you talk about this, about how without it, it's left to everyone else. So if your brand is communicating with thousands and thousands of people, then there's thousands and thousands of different versions of what they think your brand is. And I think that as a brand, and now that I'm getting into more product stuff with our LEQ is now available commercially in the US, I'm getting into more product stuff. It's very interesting to see how that can affect the perception of your product and perception of your brand if everyone is determining who that thing is based on if you don't give it a personality. So I think that showing the stakeholders that the value of this thing is that the value of your brand. You've worked so hard to create a brand. You've worked so hard to create the foundations and the guidelines for the brand. Are you going to want to sort of forego all that when you present the agent or the chat button? So that's the big thing that I tell stakeholders. But I think there's, like, for us, it's empathy, right? LEQ is an agent of empathy, I like to call it. It's artificial empathy. It's not real empathy. She can't really feel what you're feeling. She can put herself in the position of someone who understands what you're going through and can empathize with you and sort of put ourselves in your shoes. And I think if the agent can't do that, you're going to have a hard time transmitting or conveying trust and empathy. It's critical for us because we're living in the home. It's not just a one-off thing where you call your bank and you talk to an agent, which is a different type of experience. Yeah. We're living with these people day in, day out. We need to be able to be empathetic without being, and this is the trick, right? This is the hard part, without being disingenuous. How do you create empathy when they know they're talking to a robot that doesn't feel, right? By its nature, it's a code-based machine. It doesn't feel feelings in the same way that we do. But can it understand what you're going through in a way that is not fake and doesn't feel like it's pandering? I think that's the trick. And as conversation designers, if we can sort of like maneuver or do that little dance of maintaining trust, being empathetic without coming across as salesy, fake, or trying to promote something, then I think we're doing a good job.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question? I feel like I did a politician thing and just sort of skirted
No,
around.
I think you went down. I think what you're saying in a way is for LEQ, trust and empathy is the brand then, and is the persona. So I think then because the thing we maybe not really answered is, what do you think a lot of companies get wrong? So you talked about how do you communicate the value of the brand and therefore the persona to stakeholders. When being insincere is almost something that maybe you pointed out at what brands get wrong. But what do you see them struggle with, and what are some of the mistakes, or maybe some things that I can do to avoid those mistakes? Very simple steps.
So the big mistake is like this, it always has to be funny and entertaining. I don't think it always has to be funny and entertaining. I think that created some agents that aren't funny and entertaining, but are very effective. So I think it's this idea that we have to have a stand-up comedian do our bit no, you don't have to have a stand-up comedian. Just have someone who is able to understand and empathize, especially if your journeys that you're presenting are journeys that are not supposed to be funny, or that, you lost my credit card. I don't want to make a joke about, like, that's the last thing I want to hear right now is how funny you are or how clever your writer is. Like, I just want to get this thing sorted out. So, like, I think the biggest mistake is like, well, we have to make this thing entertaining and funny. No, I think you can give it character, but you don't have to make it entertaining and funny. You can just give it character, and that character becomes consistent, and then it becomes in a way funny, or you can rely on it. So it's, in that way, it's a good personality. So I think trying to be funny is always a big mistake that they make.
Yeah.
And I think the other mistake, and I think a lot of product managers might get upset with me for saying this, is this always trying to push KPIs, always trying to push like sales in the company. Like, remembering there needs to be someone on your organization. Hopefully it's you, conversation designers in the audience right now. You're protecting your customers. You're protecting the wants and needs of the people that you're promoting, selling to, or your brand is about, right? So someone needs to stand up for because product managers by their nature, want to make KPIs. They want to promote, they want to do certain things, but we have to remember as conversation designers that we have to look out for our customers, our users, first and foremost.
So we're the voice of the customer in a way. How do you validate what you create with your audience? Because they're older adults, they live in the US. You create something here, you obviously see the data and the performance there, but what are some of the other things that you do to make sure you get it right, and how do you test that with them?
It's amazing. I mean, we for a while, Intuition Robotics was a research company. We had people spending a lot of time doing research on customers, and because this is such a new field, this field of HCI, where it's in the home and we're living with our customer versus one-off interactions. So it's a different beast, basically. What was the question again?
I don't remember. How you're validating your designs.
Yeah. So basically, we had the research and we learned from that. But now, how do I validate them now? And that's a great question, because one of the reasons that I really love what I do is, and I don't think I would have this in a bigger company, is this ability to kind of see the changes that I'm making, how the customers are interacting with it. So we have this open channel. We have customer success team that posts on our company Slack. They post the users' feedback, customer feedback to all the new plans that are released. We call them up. We ask them how they're doing, how they're relating to it, how they like it, if they like it or don't like it. And we see, based on actual customers, I mean, we have a few thousand, so we can see it's not up to the numbers of millions yet. But we can see, and this is the beauty of it, because a lot of times when you create conversations, you don't see the end result. I mean, you look through the logs and everything, but you don't actually you don't see and feel the conversations. You don't really, and so having and hearing it from the customers, obviously I read the logs and go over the conversation transcripts and see where things can be improved, but hearing it from the customers and saying, for instance, LEQ asked me when the last time I got flowers. I told her it had been a few weeks, and she gave me a virtual bouquet of flowers, and it made me cry. Right now, I don't want to make our customers cry, but it was such I do that. I make my wife cry enough. I don't want to do it to other people as well. But the idea that you, as a conversation designer, can create an experience that transcends, that goes through this robot and then affects the life of someone, in such a way that they would call in and say, this made me cry. This really touched me in a way that you begin to realize that what you're doing here isn't just to make a stakeholder a bit more money, or it's about improving the lives of other people using this technology. And I think that we'd be wise to remember that should be our first, and that should be our driving force here, is to make lives better.
Yeah. And as you're talking about, I remember we once had a chat about, when we were working on that ethics course. So Jason's been one of the producers behind the scenes. It's live now on our website.
Is it? It's such an amazing course. Can we talk about this course for a second? Well, it's an amazing course.
Yeah, because you kind of bring up something which is interesting. Like in the case of, when was the last time you got flowers? And somebody says, well, actually, I'm depressed and I'm not hearing from anyone. I'm not well. Do you, as the person going through those logs, now have a responsibility to maybe act on that, where some of these ethical questions that are addressed in the course, and you spoke about that previously as well, working on that course sort of made you think differently about your work. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely, and I'd love to talk about this because this is a great topic, but I don't know if we have enough time. The thing is that when this experience that I just described, this older adult who receives flowers, right, it's a beautiful experience. We can all agree that this is a beautiful thing, and I'm gushing just talking about it. But is it ethical? It's a different question. It's a really good question too, because it's one that I haven't been able to answer, but it's one that producing the course, the Ethics in Conversational AI with Professor Cammy Rincon, which was an amazing, really changed a lot of my trajectory in terms of how I thought about this field and everything. Highly recommend it. Is it ethical that I, or as my team, or the team that I work on, creates and manipulates an experience in such a way without divulging to this person? Like, remember, hey, this experience of you getting flowers was actually written by a bunch of people who are, in charge of the personality and content of this robot. It's not actually flowers from the robot, which on one hand, you would say, well, that just ruined the freaking experience, man. This is like, there's something to be said for the experience, which is kind of where I come from. Like, I'm a film person. I come from the world of filmmaking where everything is kind of fake. But at the same time, the story is the thing here, right? The narrative. But this is real life. And do they, especially with a vulnerable population, like I said, with these older adults. So sorry, I'm seeing opera in the background. I don't know if I was losing my mind or if someone was just playing opera. But it's a real ethical question, and I don't know the answer to this question. And I've talked about it. I've made videos about it, and but the one thing that I am encouraged that we're talking about it. And I think that's something that just the fact that we're having this conversation, is the fact that there is the Turing Institute, and there is people like Professor Cammy Rincon who are talking about the ethical implications of us, what our responsibilities are. Like, what is my responsibility as a conversation designer, knowing what I know about ethics? How do I go about then designing these conversations? And so it's a very important course, and I highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it, and I think it behooves people to watch it and to really learn from it like I did.
Yeah, because it just follows the CDI workflow. But for each of those steps, what are some other considerations that you would think about, or stuff that you might want to consider if you want to do this in an ethical way, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for everybody, it was an eye opener to learn from Cammy Rincon. They really have very great insights into that. There's one last thing, and then I'm going to let you go back to work because Jason is very busy. So I'm very thankful for you taking some time to talk to us today. You talk a lot about, or I want to ask you, what did you learn from Yaki? And it was working within embracing the limitations of the technology. And as the technology evolves, you're just dealing with different limitations, and you need to understand those. And within those limitations is your freedom to create something remarkable. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
That's amazing, because I think that's a great way to wrap it up, because it also kind of brings us back to the large language models, because I think that's kind of where it's going. I think in terms of limitations, right, and being able to design within or without limitations at this point with the large language models. So for years, we've been designing conversations with limitations. The technology is very limited. So we've had to be creative and had to come up with creative ways in creating complex experiences that are relatively simple in terms of the technology behind it. And so in a lot of ways, coming from a literary background, I was in my 7 years of undergrad, I spent a year as a literary major. Sonnets, the sonneteers of being able to use that format and being able to be creative and being able to sort of innovate within that format. And so that's kind of where we were at for a while. I started in 2015 in this field. And for years, it was really designing within the limitations and how to create amazing experiences within the limitations of the technology. But now we have the large language models, and some of those limitations are seemingly gone, but actually we have even bigger limitations now. And we have to learn how to sort of overcome those with the large language models, with this new field of prompt engineering, which a lot of you are probably hearing about and thinking about. Maybe there'll be a course from CDI soon about prompt engineering. That might be an interesting idea for next year. So the idea that now you have this amazing corpus that can answer pretty much anything, but you have to get into precision. Now we're not even about, now we're getting into how does it get into the voice of my agent? How do I get it to sound like how do I get it to say only truthful things and not lies and misconceptions? A lot of times the GPT comes up with stuff that's not necessarily true. So there is going to be working within the limitations that we're going to continue. But for years, that was what guided me in designing conversations for all the agents that I did.
Oh, thank you. Let's see if there are any questions from the audience. People are asking a little bit about that course on ethics. So if you go to CDI, your dashboard, you should be able to find it there. I was just looking online, and the workflow course has been added today as well. I think the ethics course here, Introduction to Conversational AI Ethics. I see the link here now. Oop. Let me actually put that in the chat. If there's anyone that has a question for Jason, then drop them in the chat. We have a few more minutes, and then we're waiting, and then we're going to learn about what I said about the Brazilian elections and using WhatsApp to mobilize people. It's kind of fun.
Hans, this has been lovely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for hosting me, and lovely workshops and hackathons. This is an amazing event. Thank you for.
It's a 3-hour-long hackathon. Oh, and what's the bot that assists senior citizens, Jason? What's that? LEQ.
It's a robot. Yeah, LEQ. Yeah, go to ELLIQ.com. You can see some sampling of LEQ in action.
Yeah, because how long have you been with IR now?
2 years.
2 years. Yeah, boom. People are finding it. Good. Thank you so much. And now we're going to take a short break. Maybe feel free to pop in. You know the schedule. Whenever you got 5 minutes, we're always happy to see your face. And then we're waiting for InfoBip that will join us. So everybody get up, stretch your legs, do a few jumping jacks, get the energy back up. My TV, I had like a beautiful work of art behind me on the TV. TV turned up during this talk.
I know, I saw it happen in real time.
It's all live, baby. We're streaming to about 10 million homes in North America and in Europe. This is the biggest event since the wedding of Harry and Meghan. And I guess we'll be back, right? You want to?
We'll see you right after.
What kind of a dog is good at magic? A Labrador.
Labrador.
It's not very good.
I went to a zoo the other day, and it only had one dog. It was a Shih Tzu.
I have that one here. Yeah.
Oh shit! Sorry. All right. Anyway.
That's all right.
Bye, everyone.
If you can't sleep, count sheep. Don't count endangered animals. You will run out.